who gave us the presentation at the last meeting about social justice with the overlay maps. And that was a fabulous investment on our part. But it always takes money. So we'll be looking for contributions now. It's a possibility for us. One other comment I'd like to make. There's been a lot of attention to Tom McCall lately. And I was inspired to go look up his Pollution in Paradise documentary. It was done almost 50 years ago when he was a KGW reporter considering running for governor. So he does a lot of interviews with industry and state officials, and it's every bit as relevant now 50 years later as it was when he first made it. I found it fascinating. So it's available on YouTube. You can also just Google Pollution in Paradise, but it was pretty fascinating to watch, so I'd recommend it. So that's all I've got.
All right, well, thanks for that, Doug. Yeah, we really appreciate any type of contributions. We're actually pretty excited about our donation button that we have on our website and also in our newsletter. I'm going to go ahead and put our website in the chat box here, so that any of you who haven't been to our website, please go and check it out. Love to see you over there and see what's going on. And Sarah, thank you for that message in the thread. Yes, so Portland Harbor CAG and Braided River campaign are offering tours in Portland Harbor. And if you guys can, there's also an exhibit, The Lost Voices of the Willamette River, that we've put together over at the Linton Community Center over in Linton. Just right off of the highway there. So if you if you're interested in a private tour, please reach out to Sarah Taylor, and Sarah can put her contact information in the chat as well. And love to be able to give group tours. We did one for the Physicians of Social Responsibility. We also did a tour with some youth. I can't remember the name of the school, Sarah. Do you remember the name of the school that the young people were with that? But nonetheless, it was
variety of schools. It was a variety of schools, and University of Portland was also a recent tour.
Yeah, so these are really fun. They're really quite dynamic. And if you're not familiar with North Portland, this is a great opportunity for you to kind of, really dive in deep and see like how this area of the city has evolved into what it is today, and also what it was too before all of this stuff was here as well. Sarah does a great job at being an oral historian on the area. We're really, really quite proud of what she's been doing with that there. So with that, we have two amazing presentations tonight. We have Tom Armstrong, who is the supervising planner for Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. He's going to be talking to us about the economic opportunity analysis, and he'll be explain this to us. I did put a couple of links into the announcement about the EOA, so people can get a little bit familiar with it. If you have that announcement handy, you can look in there and you can see those two links. And that gets you a little bit more familiar if you want to review it after the meeting too. And we also have Art Dahlin, I hope I said that correctly, Art, who is a general manager for FOSS Maritime Company. And Art's going to be talking to us about salmon-friendly docks, which we are very, very interested in. I'm hoping that someone from Frog Ferry will be in the chat or be in the Zoom meeting tonight, because they're going to be launching next summer or next fall their exploratory adventures of doing ferries on the Willamette River. So that's a really exciting thing. So we're really excited to hear both of our presenters tonight. And with that, I think we're probably going to go ahead and jump right on into this with Tom. Tom, we'll see if we can get you all set up here and with your slides, and we'll start your presentation first.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the Portland Economic Opportunities Analysis, which we refer to as the EOA for shorthand. Let's see, advance my slide. There we go. And so the EOA is a required document required by the state that we do as part of the comprehensive land use plan for the city of Portland. And what it is it requires us to look at the state requirement is to show or demonstrate that we have the growth capacity to accommodate 20 years of growth. And the EOA covers the economy, the employment land. And then we also do something similar called a housing needs analysis for the residential side of the land use equation. And it really has 4 basic elements, and the link to the webpage that I put in the chat, you can find these documents that from the last time we did this, which was in 2016. But really what we do is we look at recent development trends, employment trends, market factors that are influencing development. We then look at the employment growth forecast, which we get from Metro. They do a regional forecast and allocation to individual cities and counties. They do that every 6 years. That informs their work on the urban growth boundary management, as well as the regional transportation plan. And then we do, the third piece of this is we do a development capacity analysis. This is basically the supply. What land do we think is available over the next 20 years to accommodate new development? And then we go through a process to reconcile the demand with the supply and to make various policy choices or program choices to show how we're going to meet the 20 years of growth, and to come up with to show that we have adequate capacity to meet the 20 years of growth. For the EOA, what we do is we think of Portland in a bunch of different business districts that have similar land use types. And so And this really falls into 4 broad categories. And that is usually what we show here is the industrial sector, which is sort of the gray areas along the 2 rivers, the harbor itself, the Columbia corridor out to the airport, and East Columbia out to Fairview and Gresham. And then we also think of the office sector, which is primarily located in the central city. We have the retail sector, the neighborhood commercial sector, which is all our neighborhood business districts. And then we have what we call the institutional sector, the campus institutions, the hospitals and colleges that are scattered throughout the city. And each of those sectors you can think about it, they have a different sort of predominant building type. whether it's industrial warehouse manufacturing space or hospitals or retail buildings. And so that we look at each of those sectors and geographies close up in a different way. And one of the things, and I'll get deeper into this in a minute, but in addition to having different building types, these different areas have different wage distributions, different job opportunities. And so, you know, the central city, you know, almost half the jobs are higher wage jobs, higher wage office jobs. Same for the institutions. Whereas in the industrial areas, there are more middle wage jobs. And then in the neighborhood commercial area, there's lots of, it's dominated by low wage jobs, retail clerk jobs, food prep jobs, that sort of thing. And so where we wind up is a sort of a forecast on how we expect to grow, where and what types of jobs we expect to add. And we go through a process to show that we have enough capacity to accommodate those forecasted jobs. And what you see on the right here is the 2016 plan, when we updated the 2035 comprehensive plan. These are the balances that we sort of wound up with after all of those decisions that went into that plan sorted out. What you see here is that, and I might have a different way, but what you really see here is we have a lot of capacity to accommodate jobs in the central city. We have a lot of capacity in our commercial districts. We were short of capacity in our institutions, and we made some changes to the zoning code to allow more growth on our campus institutions. And we were really short of land in our industrial areas, and we made some changes there. But we only had a slight surplus there back in 2016 when we did this. And it's really about what goes on in our industrial areas and the competing interests in those areas, especially along the river and along the Columbia Slough and the Columbia River, that really make for some difficult policy choices. And so what we're doing with this update is we have a new forecast from Metro that takes us out to the year 2045. So we're bumping that up. It's for about 80,000 jobs in Portland. We're updating our assumptions based on, in terms of the types of jobs and the types of development we expect, based on the last 10 years of development and job growth trends. And then what we're really looking at is a bunch of different land use change scenarios, and considering what the impact is from those different options. And as part of looking at those impacts, what we want to really focus on is the increasing wage inequality that is going on in Portland and the region, for that matter. And I have just a few slides here on that inequality. So, you know, this is the recent job growth trends. This is I think this is 2007 to 2017. And it shows that, you know, the region has been adding a lot of high wage jobs. Jobs that are typically, I believe that's earning more than $65,000 a year. And a lot of low wage jobs, but not much in this middle wage category. We also see that in sort of on the household growth side from the census data that, we've, in that it's even more stark in terms of being able to show that we have added, over almost 90,000 households that are earning more than $100,000 a year. And so you can really see, and this is a regional number in terms of just new households coming to the region being on that upper end of that income scale. At the same time, when we look at the data, we're continuing to see persistent racial income disparities in terms of average income, household incomes, or median household incomes haven't really changed much, and in some ways we've been backsliding and losing ground in terms of for the BIPOC community and the ability to close the wage gap there. Which sort of leads us, and one of the key questions that we are asking through this EOA update process is, how can we address that income disparity by providing middle wage jobs, jobs that are earning $35,000 to $60,000 a year, and especially jobs that sort of fall more onto the left side of this diagram in terms of thinking about jobs that people without four-year college degrees can do. And those are construction jobs and installation, repair, and some healthcare support and some office support. But a lot of manufacturing and warehouse and distribution jobs really fall into this category. The x-axis here is the share of employed workers in those sectors with bachelor degrees. So the more to the left, we don't see a lot of people with four-year degrees, whereas when we get up here into the upper right-hand side of the graph, you have the management and the business and the finance and the legal jobs that all predominantly require four-year degrees and above. So some of the things that we know we're going to address through this EOA update that we have out there and have to solve for is there are new floodplain regulation requirements from FEMA that we need to account for. We've been looking at changes to the environmental overlay zones that protect the natural resources especially along the Columbia Slough, and making adjustments to those. We've had an ongoing debate about tree preservation and tree planting requirements in the heavy industrial zone and how those might apply in those zones and what that impact is. There are some farther out sort of land conversion scenarios that may or may not come to fruition. For a while there, we were talking about the possibility of baseball stadium on Terminal 2 in the harbor. That seems to have gone away for now, and we don't expect that to be part of this EOA study. There's been a study, a conceptual plan for extending streetcar out to Montgomery Park through the Northwest Industrial Zone that might involve conversion of some industrial area on the old ESCO foundry area. And so through all of these scenarios, we're going to do an analysis and engage in a community conversation around what are the benefits of making this change and what are the impacts to economic opportunity. And what does it mean, you know, if we have limited opportunity in our industrial areas, what kinds of other things can we do to provide an equivalent economic opportunity for middle wage jobs for people without four-year college degrees. And I think with that, I will stop there and open it up for your questions. I will say, so we expect this process to fold out probably for the next 12 to 18 months. We've done some of the background research for our trends report. We're starting to dig into the forecasts. We're doing what we call the buildable land inventory to see what has been developed over the last 10 years, what might likely be redevelopable over the next 20 years, and to see just what land base we have to work with. And then we will start a community discussion about these trends and these options and where we stand. Eventually that will turn into a proposal that will go to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. They will hold public hearings on this information, and then they will forward a recommendation to City Council. City Council will hold another round of hearings and then formally adopt it as part of the comprehensive plan. And so we expect that to happen sometime in 2023, first part of 2023, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation there, Tom. So we do have some questions of you. And so I think what we're going to do is if folks want to go ahead and raise your hand with the reaction button, you can get into a queue that way. We'll go ahead and do the raise hands, and then we'll read off the questions that are in the chat. So it looks like we have John Marshall. John, if you want to go ahead and ask your question and unmute yourself.
Yeah, my question is, given that industrial land inventory seems to be an area where it looks like there may be quite a bit of pressure to look for new industrial land, I guess my question revolves around how much of existing zoned industrial land will be targeted first versus looking at new expansion into other areas, and if there is going to be any exploration of expansion, will any of those areas be in environmentally sensitive areas? And if that is in fact the case, how much of your local land use plan has anticipated the federal regulatory process in terms of how you make your decisions about looking at potential new industrial lands? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a lot of options inside the city of Portland for new industrial land areas. We did a pretty thorough job back in 2016 when we adopted the current EOA. We were left with some, I would say, pretty marginal and pretty controversial options left within the city of Portland. West Hayden Island comes to mind as one that was thoroughly debated, and the city council made a decision that they weren't ready to go there. I don't foresee that coming back on the table as an option. And so I think really in terms of new industrial capacity, I think we're looking more in terms of what can we do to support sort of the reuse and intensification of our existing industrial land base? And what that means is stuff like, highlighting the importance of coming to some resolution and get going on cleaning up the harbor and resolving the liability question, because we definitely see that as a shadow hanging over the reuse and redevelopment of the harbor sites. What can we do in terms of freight infrastructure investment to push more throughput through the system, move freight? I know the last time around when we looked at our neighborhood business districts and we updated the zoning there, we allowed for more small scale light manufacturing assembly uses. So are there more opportunities there? Are there more opportunities for home-based businesses like construction contractors? And can we support that work in a more dispersed way? So I think we're looking more like strategies like that, and more like pushing it up to the regional level, saying, you know what, Portland's basically built out. If there is this demand for additional warehouse space or different manufacturing space, then it's going to have to go elsewhere in the region. And we're already seeing that. Big warehouses in Wilsonville and Woodburn are going in, and even Canby. So.
Okay, thank you for that there. Okay, Doug, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, and you started to touch on one of them. Because of the urban growth boundary, population density is limited to the inside of that. So it seems like eventually there's a conflict between half of the land that's now dedicated to manufacturing and industry versus the 3/4 of the jobs that come from all the other sectors. So as the other sectors grow, do you anticipate that manufacturing and industry will continue to be pushed outside the residential boundary?
I don't think so. And we at the city, we're really trying to hold the line on that. I think we see, and what that earlier table showed is, we have a lot of capacity to grow higher density buildings, office buildings, apartment buildings in the central city and in our neighborhood commercial districts. And that's where it's economically feasible. And so I think accommodating all of those jobs and even all of the residential growth, we can do that with our land base in these other areas without having to convert the industrial area, industrial lands. And so we have a pretty good policy framework to protect those that industrial land base. And so, special projects like a baseball stadium or even, this streetcar extension, that changes the debate, the dynamic a little bit. But I still think it calls the question to, are we using our limited industrial land base in a judicious way?
A second graph that you showed about middle income being such a low level. Coming out of COVID, we seem to have learned that the service industry has been hugely undervalued. And where $15 an hour minimum wage was rejected by Congress, now you see that starting wages are $20, $25. They've skipped way beyond that already. So as those service jobs become more a livable wage job, you anticipate that raises the number of mid-income jobs that Portland's going to grow into?
I think that's on the margin. And because I think what we see in the industrial area is that those jobs have a higher ceiling to them. You know, there's a career ladder there. Whereas the jobs, you know, they all may start out at the same point, you know, that $15 to $18 to $20 an hour. But pretty quickly you sort of top out in the retail service sector, whereas the construction and the manufacturing and the truck driving have a much higher end, you know, the career ladder that you can progress through.
Well, for example, we're seeing a lot of people leaving the education industry, a lot of people dropping out of healthcare because they feel their jobs don't compensate them for what it costs them. So I'm wondering if manufacturing jobs might be overweighted in the overall assessment of the regional economy. The white collar jobs seem to be selling Portland livability as an attraction to draw workers into Portland. So it becomes obviously here at the Superfund Forum, what we look at is the impacts of industrial pollution and its impact on people who are looking for livability and a job in a new city.
Yeah, I think you still come back to, in our city, where are people without college degrees going to work? And does it pay enough wage that they can live in our city? And I think the industrial jobs still play a hugely important role in providing those living wages.
Well, I'll let somebody else have a chance.
Thanks for that, Doug. Okay, Laura, it looks like your hand's up if you want to unmute yourself there and ask your question to Tom.
Yeah, hi. I feel like I'm coming from a different planet, but I'll just forge ahead. I don't know if you've been following the COP26, but climate disaster is upon us. It's going to change everything. And when I come to meetings like this, where it is not factored into planning, I choke. I just absolutely choke. I mean, whatever industrial is, it's not going to be the same thing in as short as 10 years from now. I just gasp. You do not include climate change trends, and that horrifies me. Let me continue. Also, job growth trends. You should be looking at climate job trends. You know, fossil fuels are going away. I hate to tell you this. One way or another, they are, and the city is not planning for that, and that makes me crazy. So we need to start thinking about climate jobs. And you know, finally, a 4-year degree, at least I've known this for several years, a 4-year degree plus a quarter will buy you a cup of coffee. So I'm not sure what you're talking about there. I know a lot of service people have college degrees. So I don't know, I'm not feeling very confident with this overall plan. And until you include the climate disaster, it's hard to listen to this, with all respect. Thank you.
Well, with all respect, I think we are, to a certain extent, factoring in the climate change and the climate trends as we can foresee them right now. And there's sort of two things there. One is ultimately we are judged by the state on the evidence and the reasonableness of our assumptions. And if we get too far out ahead of ourselves and don't have the evidence to back it up, the industry groups will appeal this plan and it'll get sent back to us and we'll have to do it again. So in some ways, yes, we are a little bit conservative in that respect. We are in this 20-year time frame, we are not assuming redevelopment of all the fossil fuel tank farms, nor are we assuming that they are going to expand and drive a huge demand for all of that. I think the other thing that we need to talk about and explore is two things. One is, well, what do you think is a climate job? If it's a bunch of solar panel installers, those look like construction jobs today. Where do all the solar panels get stored? They get stored in warehouses in our industrial area. So if we're expanding if we're expanding solar panels or windmill manufacturing, all of that goes in our industrial areas. And so we foresee a need, whether that's a climate job or a fossil job, they're all going in this area, and they're all at its core a manufacturing job or a construction job or a distribution job.
So just quickly, I think of a climate job as remediation, someone who's cleaning up the waste that is everywhere and is imperiling our very existence. That's from Hanford Nuclear Weapons Site on the Columbia River to the Superfund site. There's plenty of work to be done in terms of restoring and cleaning up. That's a climate job.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Laura. Thank you so much. And our next, Sarah, it looks like your hand is up if you want to ask Tom a question.
Sure, Tom.
Like you had some stuff in the thread too. Did you want
Yeah, I'll ask him. So I was hoping that since we are a Superfund group, that you would talk more about how you see the Superfund and the cleanup impacting your plans, and how your plans, maybe Hunter or someone can talk about how your plans will impact the cleanup. I've been concerned that as long as it stays heavy industrial zoning, that there will be less of a cleanup. And so that is a concern. I'm also concerned because we are having this cleanup that's costing billions and billions of dollars and taking years because of past planning practices. So how do we go forward, not creating new Superfund situations, not creating inequities in our neighborhoods? Because as you know, the Superfund is only in the Portland Harbor. So I hear you also saying, well, we have to reconcile the damage. And I don't know exactly what that means to you, because for all of us, the industries have to pay for the cleanup. They have to pay for restoration projects, and there has to be land for those restoration projects. So how are you putting together these pieces of the Superfund in your planning?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two main ways. The first is on the Superfund side and on the cleanup side, some of what we're tracking at BPS, not necessarily, and we're feeding this information to BES and to EPA and to DEQ, is there are some critical sites, especially sites that have docks and harbor access, that we feel need to be cleaned up, and that cleanup needs to be more in terms of dredging and removal, and not capping and keeping the pollution in place. Because once you cap it, you can't put in new docks, you can't dredge it to get maritime traffic in there. You lose the functionality that marine access provides. And so for key critical sites that for the marine industrial dependent sites that want that marine access, we are tracking and very sensitive to what type of cleanup is going on in the river and maintaining that marine access functionality. The other thing that we recognize is the need to get the cleanup going, to come up with a plan, to assign the liability for the cleanup costs to all of the entities, to get clarity on that. And we feel that lack of clarity, that lack of the liability assignment is holding things back. somebody does not want to buy into that liability and redevelop a riverfront site with some unknown liability cost hanging out there. And so from the BPS perspective is we want to see a resolution of that liability sooner rather than later so that people have that certainty and we can start to clean up and we can start to reuse these sites that maybe people are definitely shy about reinvesting in.
Okay, and I'm noticing too that there was a question. I don't know if Sarah got to this one here, but she did ask about, does the zoning impact the level of Superfund cleanup? Did you answer that question?
If I understood the question correctly, I think about it in sort of two ways, or well, I guess a couple ways. Yes, there will be some mitigation sites. We've already seen some, like the Linton plywood site and the PGE site up there. We know there'll be more. We're not sure how we're going to factor those into this calculation, but I will say the industrial zoning mitigation restoration sites are an allowed use under the zoning. So there is not a zoning barrier to sort of that repurposing, that reuse, that restoration use. That is an allowed use. So there isn't a zoning barrier. And so in some ways, that's something that we can account for going forward when we do these updates every 5 to 7 years. Versus saying, well, is it going to be 20 acres or 30 acres? It's that the amount of mitigation and restoration that's going to occur is still pretty fuzzy and unknown, at least that I've been able to see out, from there.
Okay, thanks for that. Tom, we have one question in the chat here from Barbara Quinn. She had said, to the earlier question about industrial zoning being placed on environmentally sensitive land, that is happening currently in the Baltimore Woods corridor. The northernmost property is labeled a special habitat area, North Reach River Plan, and is at the same time an industrial sanctuary. She also, that's her first bit there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one of that Columbia Slough environmental overlay zone changes. That's really gets at this example, even though the Baltimore Woods isn't on the slough itself. But there is a series of adjustments, mostly expansion of the environmental overlay zones to protect those resources. And again, we'll go through, right now on its way to early next year, City Council will be looking at making changes to the environmental overlay zones in everywhere else in the city other than the industrial areas. And then as part of the EOA process, we'll be looking at, what are the trade-offs, what are the values of protecting or not protecting these resources. And being able to explore that and really tee up for council to make a decision on which resources are going to be protected and which lands are going to continue to be available for industrial development.
Okay, all right. So, and then there was, why can't the brownfield site be cleaned and repurposed for industry instead of contaminating new sites?
Yeah, so right now what we are facing is a gap between the financial feasibility of an industrial warehouse development and sort of the rents that businesses pay versus the cost of cleanup. And the cleanup costs far outweigh, in most cases, the cleanup costs outweigh the profit a developer or a business can make on that industrial development, because the industrial use the rents and the land values tend to be are on the lower end of the scale in terms of land values and value there. It's why you see projects in the central city and in the commercial districts, they're much more profitable. They can absorb much more of the cleanup costs and still make a profit. That gap in the industrial areas is much wider. And so we're exploring, we have a new tool out of the state. The state legislature set up basically a forgivable loan program to cover some of those cleanup costs. There is a fundamental polluter, the person that did the original pollution cannot benefit from these programs. But a lot of time you have abandoned orphan sites. And so we need to find other ways to figure out how to close that cost gap so that we can put these vacant abandoned sites back into productive use.
Now, Bob Salinger wanted to ask a couple of questions here. Bob, did you want me to read what you already posted, or did you want to go for it?
Why don't I just go for it? Hi, Tom. Thanks for doing this tonight. Just two quick follow-up questions. I'm curious. I'm really happy to hear the city is concerned about capping in environmentally sensitive areas. So I just wanted to hear more about what the city is doing to actually make sure that that's minimized. And then the second follow-up, and then I'll just go off, was I think it's following up on a question, maybe it was Barbara that asked it, but the cleanup standards are different for different land uses, really. And so if something's left in industrial, it's likely not to be cleaned up or to have institutional controls or things like that on it that will make it very difficult to convert it to other uses in the future. And so how are we dealing with that? If we think the river is going to evolve and we clean up to a lower standard, how do we lock ourselves in basically in perpetuity to an industrial use on that site, or at least severely limit the other uses that could be put on a site?
We're getting a little bit beyond my expertise here in terms of cleanup and that's really Annie von Berg's territory in terms of what we're doing. I just know what we're feeding them, and it looks like Don may have an answer there. I'm just representing what BPS is telling them as to what are our important values from sort of this lens. I think you are right, Bob, and my experience is more with the upland brownfield cleanup, that yes, if you're gonna be in industrial use and you're not gonna have people living there and you're not gonna have kids grubbing around in the dirt, there is a lower cleanup standard. And yeah, we are planning for it to continue doing industrial use, and if future conversion happens, then they're gonna have to come back in and figure out how to clean it up or account for that, any contamination that still remains.
Okay.
Don, did you have information to enlighten that situation?
I do, because we were working through this issue, and if there's somebody from EPA, they can certainly pipe in, but we looked at that and came to the conclusion after me getting up to speed on it, is that the cleanup is not based on industrial use. It's based on people swimming, people, recreating. So it's basically any land use. It doesn't matter what the zoning is. So if it gets converted, it won't have an impact.
Yeah, and our concern is from our perspective, our program perspective, is that a lot of the polluters, a lot of the industrial people or whoever's liable for that, they may not care about that future marine access for industry or whatever, and they just want to cap and go. That's the cheapest option, and we're saying no. there are still some critical functions there that we want to maintain for the future.
But that's different than the cleanup itself. The cleanup is going to be done protective for any zoning.
Yeah.
But then how it gets cleaned up is a different issue.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Doug has another question there. You want to unmute yourself there?
Okay, so let me start out with an analogy and then work back to the river. There's a big debate in the forested part of the state where it's easy to assign a value to the saw timber. They can cut it down and log it and sell it on the market, and they know economically what that's worth. But the evolving argument is that recreational use of the forest make them sometimes, in some cases, more valuable to leave the trees standing. But then those intangibles of the value of the recreational use and their impact on the economy are a lot more difficult to quantify. So if we switch that discussion over to the river, Portland is a city divided in half by a river. There are probably about 40 miles of riverbank within the city, and there's almost no public access. There are a couple of parks that run down to the river, but out of 40 miles, we have maybe half a mile worth of public access. So that intangible of the value of people accessing the river doesn't show up anywhere in your analysis. So how do you factor that in? In the forest example, the evolving argument is that those intangibles are actually more valuable than the quantifiable timber cutting.
The way, I guess, the way that we would explore it through the EOA is, well, what is it that you want? Where is it? How much? Do you want a 10-acre park? Do you want 2 20-acre parks? That's the sort of proposal that we can sort of deal with. Where and what kind of access do you want to the river, especially along this harbor area, and especially after, we figure out what Metro's doing with Willamette Cove and some of the other opportunity sites that we have. That's sort of the level of analysis that we have the capability of doing, especially within this time frame.
Right. So you kind of make my point for me, is that we would like to put pressure on decision makers to incorporate that into their thinking. There aren't really public forums where we can have access to that decision. And meanwhile, the format that you're evolving your economic impact statement kind of precludes that being part of the discussion.
I don't think it precludes it. I don't think we are going to do a lot of sophisticated analysis to try and figure out what the value of that intangible is. I think it is a basic, our level and what we can do is a basic trade-off. Is it going to be industrial or is it going to be park? Well, how much parkland do you want? And where do you want it? And what does that impact mean on what is largely already a built out industrial area? So it's going sort of from one column to another.
I'd probably make the argument that I don't see it as quite as black and white as industrial versus parkland. Given the present economic trends that maybe half of all the office jobs aren't going to go back to office buildings, that means it's going to be people living on the riverbank who are working from home. And that means access to the river and the amenities that offers make those jobs all the more valuable.
But I think that goes back to what Bob Salinger was getting at is right now we don't have people living on the river in the industrial area. They're living in the central city, they're living in the South Reach. That's where the people are. And we've made intentional decisions to keep people out because of or try to keep people out because of that conflict along that edge when you start having people live up close to these industrial areas. And I think, again, you look at everywhere else, we have lots of capacity to grow a lot of office jobs and a lot of condos and apartments elsewhere in the city to accommodate that use without having to tap in to these areas.
Thank you, Tom, and Doug. Thanks for the questions. But we have another presenter that we have to get to. But Tom, if you want to hang out, and we can broach some more of these inquiries after Art's Q&A, because it sounds like this is an intriguing.
Well, and I'm certain I'll be back. Me or Steve Kuntz or other people from our office will be back to talk about this issue over the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, all right. We hope to see you for sure. I hope so. Okay.
Thank you, Tom, for coming and talking in the lion's den here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being so generous with all the Q&A. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so our next presenter that we have is going to be Art. Art's going to present and talk to us about salmon-friendly docks that FOSS has been working on. And he has some slides to queue up here. And it'd be great if you can also kind of tell our audience about this image here that we're looking at. If you can just give us a little bit of info. You briefly talked about it when you first came on and we were doing the logistics on it. And you may have to unmute yourself there.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
After 2 years, you think I know how to use Zoom. So actually, I do have a little more information on this slide later in the presentation. So okay, well, I'll get to it. Again, my name is Art Dahlin. I'm the general manager for FOSS Maritime here in the Columbia River. Columbia Snake River region is what we call it. We're located in Linton, right near the St. John's Bridge, where we provide tug services really throughout the whole river system. So before getting into our docks, I thought I'd just briefly describe FOSS for those who don't know what we do, and then dive right into the docks. So just briefly, like I mentioned, we are a tug service provider. The main thing we start every meeting out with is a safety moment, but also just want to emphasize our biggest, our values are safety to our people, to the environment, and to the equipment. And that's basically every presentation we give starts with our with this slide, which is Paul Hendricks, our director of marine assurance, and also health, safety, environment, and quality. So FOSS is part of the Saltchuk Marine family of companies. I did get a question earlier about our operations in Alaska. So we do operate in Alaska, but that's alongside our sister company, Cook Inlet Tug and Barge. Amnav operates in California, Young Brothers in Hawaii, and Starlight also operates in California. Brief history of FOSS. It was started in 1889 by FOSS in Tacoma, basically as a ferry service, and then ended up towing logs and providing assists to different vessels. In 1987, Saltchuk purchased FOSS, and we are still part of Saltchuk. So predominantly, we're on the West Coast. Here's a map of that. Our corporate headquarters are in Seattle, but as you can see here, we do have offices throughout the whole West Coast, as well as the East Coast. So a little bit about the Columbia Snake River region. We've been here over 100 years. Through various acquisitions, but again, as the region is transformed, from log rafts to where we're at now, we're providing transportation services all the way to Lewiston. In this picture It's actually wind components. So we helped one of our industry partners in transporting wind components for turbines that were destined for Canada, but they came in through Port of Longview and Port of Vancouver onto our barges, and then we barged those all the way to Lewiston, where they were trucked up north to Canada. So here in the river, as I mentioned, our office is in Portland, but we also have an office in Astoria. So the main thing we do is provide ship assist services. So all the vessels that come in and out need help on and off the docks or escorts up and down the river. I also mentioned the spec towing that we provide, project cargo towing that we provide up and down the Columbia Snake River system. And the third thing we do, and I think I mentioned earlier, it's a pilot boat out of Astoria. It's the FOSS that provides pilot services to the bar pilots as well as the Columbia River pilots. One thing we're focused on, whether it's the West Coast or East Coast, is emerging markets of renewable energy. We're heavily involved in some of the offshore wind projects, or would like to be heavily involved in some of the offshore wind projects on the East Coast, and also as they open up on the West Coast. One thing we do here in the river, but really throughout the world, is emergency response and rescue towing, whether that's a ship that grounds or a significant casualty like that's pictured here, or a vessel that loses propulsion out in the ocean. We have the assets that can go help. So here's another list of our locations, but I wanted to put this slide up because that is the actual picture of our office here in Portland. We provide dispatch services throughout the West Coast, but also weather monitoring and incident response for the rest of our organization here in the Linton facility in Portland. So I'll get into our new docks now. I wanted to show this slide, this picture. It's an aerial view of our docks at Linton. You can see our building up on the hill there, but really the focus of it is to really upgrade the facility to be able to better really service our vessels, but doing it along lines of every law and regulation that we have. But the focus is to basically replace these older wooden docks that were designed for log boats with environmentally friendly steel docks that can support a growing region, and also the larger tractor tugs that you can see in the picture. So basically we'll remove the upper section, which is broken, and modify the section that there in the middle, and then remove the lower section that you can see also by the tug and replace it with steel docks. But the other thing I guess I didn't mention is as these docks continue to rot, for lack of a better word, but deteriorate, there's a safety component to our mariners getting on and off. So really the challenge is design a project that can meet the project purpose while also satisfying conflicting uses. So obviously we're very cognizant of the fish and wildlife in the area, the cleanup options, protecting threatened and endangered salmon, the city greenway program. So as kind of a lot of folks have mentioned in this meeting, building new docks present a challenge that also provides an opportunity, I think, to upgrade the facility and also the environmental impacts as well. So one thing we wanted to be sure of with this project was that the new floats could be temporarily relocated to accommodate any remedial dredging that occurs. So that was up foremost in our engineering and design. So these docks will be able to be removed in any, like I said, remedial dredging. The current timbers, the pilings are creosote treated timber, and we'll replace those with steel. And then we've adopted the EPA's best management practice for pile removal and driving. So when we talk about salmon, we really want to limit structures in shallow water to minimize ambush cover for predatory fish and birds. I won't go through and read all the bullets as you can, but the idea is to ensure there's adequate, there's not shading with the new docks that we install we'll use a grading type system to ensure that the juvenile, or I guess the predatory fish, don't have that place to hide and attack the salmon. Again, they're in deeper water, oriented parallel to the shoreline. We're actually reusing a float from another facility. And the one thing that we've continued to focus on over and over is that there's no net increase in overwater coverage. So, you know, while we'll be able to service bigger vessels, we're not adding more, again, overwater coverage to the facility. So best management practice for pile driving is another piece that will ensure occurs. And this is a vibratory hammer to install the new piles to the extent practical, and a bubble curtain will be used during impact pile driving. So part of this project included mitigation. So we removed derelict piles from the University of Portland's restoration site located about 2 miles upriver. The program is City of Portland Greenway program specific, and no mitigation required under Oregon's removal fill law or the U.S. Army Corps permit. So that's again a brief description of the project. We're really excited to have these new docks. As I mentioned, we've been in the area for over 100 years, and want to evolve as the rest of the you know, the world really does, to make sure we're here for another 100 years. We have roughly 70 employees in the area, all mariners that are local here as well. So that's all I have, Michael. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks for that there, Art. Yeah, so if folks have any questions, please raise your hand, or you can also list those questions in the chat. And wasn't it, Laura, I see your hand raised. Did you have a question for Art?
Yeah, Art, that last slide and that last bullet point, no remediation necessary. I didn't understand it. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So my understanding is, you know, like I said, for the habitat mitigation, we've gone ahead and removed derelict piles at the University of Portland. We're basically not providing additional shading, so there's no mitigation required for this project. We're not adding any environmental issues that will require mitigation. I'll put it that way. It's basically a 1-for-1.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, it looks like John Marshall, you have your hand raised there.
Yeah, I was just now trying to do a quick Google on the web for the nationwide permits. But I probably should have been looking also under the state or the standard local operating procedures for endangered species that NIMS has for their biological opinions for federally listed salmon. But what regulatory process exactly did you go through? Was it through the nationwide permit process through the Corps and the slopes for NIMS, or was it individual permits, or could you basically tell me what you use basically?
Sure. You know, to be honest with you, I'd be happy to answer that and get back to you. I know there's been a number of different processes we've followed to go through this, and frankly, it's not my expertise. We've hired folks to help us with that. So not to give you a non-answer, I just, you know, it was a long process. I'd be happy to follow up with you or get some information to Michael and Sarah to answer that.
That would work fine for me. Thank you.
No problem.
And I was wondering if you could also maybe just, you know, you had said that there would be no additional shading and that the pylons would be in deeper water. So I'm trying to envision what that looks like. And you know, and how would, you know, I'm wondering if you could, can you communicate like a visual, like
Sure. So here, I'll share quickly a slide that I had up. So if you notice, let's see, make sure. So here's the picture of our existing facility. All the docks we have are, wood. There's no grading or anything that prevents the shading. So all the new docks we have, first of all, they'll be in deeper water in that they'll be on the other side of the dolphins, so closer to the river than the current wooden docks. So in deeper water, but also the steel docks themselves will be floats and they won't be completely solid. In other words, the middle will be grading that allows light to go through it. So in essence, they're larger, sturdier, but there's grading in the middle of it that allows light to pass through to limit the shading.
Okay, fantastic. Cool. And then one other question: do you think that this is something that could be used in other applications? One of the things that I got excited about when I heard that you were able to present about this was the whole frog ferry thing. If we do end up getting this happening on the Willamette River with the ferry system, is this something that could be used in other areas, or even maybe for other docks within the city, the fact that the docks are possibly floatable so that remediation work could happen is that's a really exciting thing to hear, that the docks can actually moved out of the way.
Yes, certainly. So the design that we're using for these docks is widely used elsewhere as well. So certainly, if the Frog Ferry group, wherever they plan on, having their destination and origin, it's absolutely utilized all over the U.S. As far as our facility, our primary function is ship assist. We also will be able to put barges alongside, and be happy to talk to any of those folks to give them lessons learned, or even explore any type of work we could do together. But absolutely, I guess the answer to your question is these docks this design is a proven one, for functionality, but also to reduce that shading that I think would be very useful for something like you're talking about.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I don't know if everyone is aware that we do have an endangered salmon. The Willamette River salmon is an endangered species in our area, and we want to see it thrive. We really think it's important for salmon to have the salmonoids to have resting areas, along the bank of our rivers, which there doesn't exist enough of that space. So bringing you here, Art, to talk about this is kind of right up our alleys, and we are hoping that that this information that you provided with us would kind of spiral out of this community to other ears, and people would take up implementing this new approach to dock construction, so that the Willamette River salmon can be able to thrive again, hopefully. Were there any other questions for Art regarding this, regarding the salmon safe docks, or anything regarding FOSS Maritime at all?
I wanted to say
Go
something.
ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I wanted to thank you for coming, because I am really excited about the possibility of salmon-friendly docks. And I'm just going to throw out an idea, which is that you have lots of room next to your facility. And wouldn't it be cool if we could have a little mixed use industrial, and there was a place where people could go and look at the river, and maybe even have a small restaurant, and people could look out at the tugboats. I personally have a crush on tugboats. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think a lot of people love tugboats. And if we could break out of our model that industry is here and people are somewhere else, because I think it's safe to look at I think it's perfectly safe to look at a tugboat. And so I don't know, I just want to throw that idea out to FOSS that they've got a great property for river gazing. I'm not saying getting down to the beach, but I just want to throw that out into the universe.
Thanks for that, Sarah.
Thank FOSS for coming tonight. I do appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for coming to visit our facility. You're welcome to swing by anytime. Once we finish finalize permitting and finish these docks, our plan would be to have some type of a community celebration, and I'll let you know when that happens.
All right. Okay. Was there any other questions? And Tom, I don't want to put you in the hot seat again, but there were a few there were a few lingering questions. If you have the capacity or the space to be able to do a little bit more, that'd be awesome.
Sure, I'm still here.
Okay, so
I have a question about pilings. Art.
From Art. Okay, Laura.
Yeah. How, I've been told that they're very difficult and expensive to move, and that they often stir up a lot of pollution. I wonder what you know about that, what you can share about that process.
Yeah, so pilings isn't really my specialty on that front. All the permitting we've gone through is really, I think, tried to illustrate that everything we're doing is, again, not causing harm. So the pilings that will be removed are like I mentioned, the wooden ones that have creosote that can sometimes, sweat, for lack of a better word, and that the piling itself is relatively, driving them is relatively benign. However, it does take place only in a fish window. So basically anytime after October, so into November, we won't be driving pile as that's part of the fish window. But other than that, as far as stirring up any type of environmental issues below the surface, that hasn't been something that's, I guess, stopped the project, and it's gone through really all the regulators and agencies that need to review our plan. So again, I apologize, I'm not a really expert on the pilings front. Really, FOSS doesn't even drive our own pilings. We hire experts to do that, but the main focus was ensuring our plan was in line with every agency, like I said, and regulatory group out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and so John, I can read off your comments on the thread, or if you want to, you can address them yourself if you like. Or
No, you can read them. That's fine.
okay, so John says that he would add the externalities list to include flood abatement, water quality, wildlife and fish habitat, recreation, passive, etc. There may be opportunities for mixed use given the type of industrial uses that are being accommodated. I was wondering if you had any comment on that there at all, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for some of those, we think of those as ecosystem functions, and we're definitely, I guess, considering them. That's why we know there are some things that we have to do, like the FEMA floodplain regulations, where it's pretty straightforward as to what the city is required to do, and we'll account for that and factor that into our sort of baseline analysis. And then there's other things where, what do we choose to do and which values are we prioritizing in that? But definitely the ecosystem functions of the water quality and the habitat are part of that policy choice, so to speak. And it does come, that's where there is a sort of, you can attach a value to that if you especially like with flood abatement or water quality, if you're not doing it here, what's it going to cost to do it elsewhere? And that's sort of the externalized cost of the continued industrial. I think some of the stuff that you were getting at in terms of the mixed use, and especially in terms of mixing sort of the natural resource functions with the industrial use. I think that's what we were really getting at with in the North Reach plan, which again is sort of out there. It's not effective. And one of the things that we need to do as part of this EOA is to sort of begin to incorporate the analysis that allows us to adopt and implement a lot of those elements that are in that North Reach plan that get to this sort of mix of riparian area and industrial use and some of the margins like we were seeing in the FOSS doc and how we can incorporate both of those functions into a shared area.
Fantastic. Okay. And I'm going to ask one question and then we'll jump to you, John. I was wondering, does the EOA address anything about, allowing space, affordable space for light industry or local industry for artisans or makers who have their own business, small businesses? I have some friends who, do some, large sculptural welding work. And they used to have places in the Central East End area, and now, there's condos there and, high-end shops and, and all this jazz. And so now they've been pushed out and there's not a lot of affordable space for these folks to be able to do their craft. Especially when they need large spaces or whatever that they would like to possibly even share with other makers. And I was wondering, does the EOA look at any of that at all? We have such a huge entrepreneurial community here in Portland, and it seems like it's kind of always focused on very large industries. That don't really keep their money here in Portland as well. So I was just wondering if you can comment on that at all. Or...
Yeah, the EOA doesn't necessarily get down to that level of detail in terms of like those makers all get lumped into the manufacturing and production. You're making stuff, whether it's a small shop or making bikes or art sculpture or whatever, or a big company making tugboats and barges. In the EOA, it all gets rolled up to that higher level. I will say that, there isn't zoning barriers, right? You're allowed to use that type of use. That's why we found it in the Central East Side in those spaces. What the EOA doesn't get at or get a good handle on is sort of the rents and the affordability area. Other than, do we, at least in theory on the zoning map, have enough land and space that you could do that? And that, I think we're very permissive in terms of, the ability to sort of build or develop or reuse buildings to accommodate that space. And you certainly can go up. But then you're into the construction cost end of things. And then that gets pretty pricey pretty quick and unaffordable for smaller makers and artisans.
Okay. All right, John, you have another question there, John?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't envy you the job of looking through the crystal ball into the near future for land use planning. But having said that, there are certain processes, the ESEE analysis for Goal 5, the NEPA process for the federal regulatory environment for looking at viable, the least environmentally damaging practicable alternatives. And also to think about a future where we're looking less and less at paper mills and things of that nature than we are maybe server farms and warehouses and those sorts of industrial uses. That maybe, and also getting back to Laura's statements about, anticipating the future that we're looking at in terms of climate change, how that all gets encapsulated and incorporated into that land use planning process and that alternatives analyses processes. I think really, we really need to be getting more proactive on this. And I'm sort of rambling a little bit, but I share Laura's disappointment about those oil facilities not being looked at as being dismantled and removed from that area, and especially with the Cascadia event looming on the horizon in the near term. So this is just a plug for thinking about the future maybe a little bit differently than we have in the past. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you over those goals. I'm taking a very technical view of things, that there's not enough information, there's not enough trends there to say they're going to be out of business and they're not going to be here 20 years from now. And that there comes a certain amount of legal liability that if we start making those more wild, more stretched goals and assumptions, that 2 years from now, we're going to be back saying you got to do it again. And so in that sense, it's a little more technical, a little more conservative. It doesn't say that it's not going to happen. And it doesn't say that we're doing all these other things to try and make that happen. We just have to get more trends, more electric vehicle uptake, more renewable fuel uptake, less fuel consumption before we can start making those legally defensible assumptions that that land is going to be available for some other type of use. It's a very practical, pragmatic approach at this point. And it's one of those, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Someone else had mentioned remote working and what that impact's going to have on office development or where people want to live. We're in a really, uncertain area as we emerge from the pandemic and the recession as to what trends are really going to stick and where we're going to go. So that, and that's another thing why we say, well, you know what, we need to true this up every 5 to 7 years to capture those emerging trends and understand what really is happening. And then we can make the adjustments and to keep it fresh. Because the thing that we did before 2012 and we started working on our current EOA is we had done it back in 89 and we just sort of left it there, right? Never really looked at it again. And we know that's not what we need to do.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Well, Tom, thank you very much. It looks like Scott Burr has a question. Scott?
Hi, Michael. Tom, I wanted to, so we had 3 or 4 people mention to you a feeling of dissatisfaction. How do you structure our inputs to you and bring them back to your management? Are things so firm in their minds, in your team's minds, that these inputs cannot be considered? Or how would these inputs be presented back?
We're still in the early stages of all of this. I take your input back to our team. We talk about what questions we're getting, what data or analysis can we provide to enlighten that situation, because we know the same stuff is going to come up when we get to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. The same
it will.
questions are going to happen at council. So we need to figure out how to address those issues.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, there's council's going to have to make a decision, and we're gonna provide the best advice we see, and if council wants to do something different, then we will try and incorporate that and defend it to the best of our ability.
Yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of, this whole notion of uncertainty, it comes in cycles throughout the economy, and I've been around a while, so I've seen this cycle a couple times, maybe 3, 4. And one of the things that emerges during times like this is really intelligent risk management and really intelligent look at the trends. And so one way to look at it is not to say specifically, like we have provided some specific inputs to you, but how would you guys consider maybe a more enlightened approach to your risk management and to the incorporation of trends that are legitimate? There's even companies here in I guess it's across the river, Vancouver, that one of their jobs is to point out these trends that are occurring in industry to help business leaders respond to them. And so how does risk management and the identification and incorporation of these trends fit with that entire cycle you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess, I constantly in these conversations push back and try and get you all to articulate and to work with you to articulate what is it that you think the future will look like, and how can we translate that into the EOA language so that we can incorporate it into the analysis. That's why I said, river access, great. What is it that you want? Do you want a 10-acre park somewhere? Do we want a trail all the way down the river and there's no docks and no marine industry? What is that vision? And we can certainly, come up with an economic scenario that says, you know what, we're going to wind up with all these types of jobs instead of those types of jobs. And so that's sort of working through those issues to translate your visions into something that fits that sort of EOA table, because that's sort of the exercise here. And then from there, well, then does that trigger a need to change any of our policies, our economic policies in the comp plan to go in that different direction? And that's that those are bigger lifts, and that's a bigger conversation, but that's certainly an opportunity or begin to sort of turn the battleship in that direction.
One of the ways that I've been looking at this for myself, because I have a background in statistics, is, if you look at it maybe as discrete events that you're trying to accomplish. Okay, this is our goal. This is what we consider to be the most ideal. That does create a lot of contradictions between other people's vision, right? But if you look at it more like, these are the probabilities, these are the trends, and have for each scenario, it means a lot more work for you, of course, but right now I'm assuming that you guys wouldn't mind that. But let's just say that you could have a potential of different kinds of future landscapes that you were well positioned to move quickly in any 5-year segment to adopt to. That would be another consideration that might be valuable for you to think about.
Yeah, I think, again, there's a little bit of trade-off of, and we've been a little bit more, I guess, pragmatic in terms of what are the decisions that the city really needs to make in the next 3 to 5 years that are dependent on the EOA. Can't make that decision without a new EOA and have the EOA account for it. And what are things that are a little bit beyond that time frame that can wait? And we can spend the next 2-3 years talking about an economic vision that is transitioning or doing whatever. Meanwhile, we are not changing the environmental overlay zones on the Columbia Slough. We are not talking about trees. We're not planting trees or requiring trees in the heavy industrial area. And we're not adopting floodplain regulations. And so there is a practical reality of what do we want to get done in the near term and what is a longer arc to it that we need to turn that battleship and start working towards.
Wow, that, I think you laid out that, for some reason, that really lands for me now. I have an much deeper understanding of what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and explaining this. And yeah, we're really excited to have you guys back here again as we get closer to the deadline to all of this.
I wouldn't say closer to the deadline. I would say as we get into it and have more information to share and talk about these different policy choices and what the impacts might be and what your insights are, then we'll be back.
All right, fantastic. Hey, thank you so much. I also wanted to create a little space for if there are any folks on the Zoom who wanted to make an announcement, anyone from the city or from EPA that wanted to announce anything that's coming down the pike or that's happening the latter part of this month.
If I could interrupt real quick before those announcements, is that John Marshall did have one final capping comment.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Basically just saying that plans are living documents. And I thought it's a nice way to conclude the entire conversation. So.
Very good. Very good. Thanks for that, Scott. Thank you. So yeah, so if there was anyone that wanted to make any announcements for later November that's happening, just wanted to create some space for folks to come forward and talk about that. It looks like Laura's chiming in. Laura.
Yeah, the only thing I'll just remind everyone of, but you've probably heard about it, is that December 8th is the next Portland Harbor Collaborative meeting. And so we'll be sending out more information about that. And I know Michael will too. That's really the main one. So thank you.
Okay, so we have the collaborative on, that was December 8th?
Yes.
Okay, December 8th, so the collaborative. Anything from the city of Portland, or if we have any friends from Metro on, and it seems as though that we're pretty good. Well, on that note, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to our presenters. Tom, thank you once again. This is a tough crowd, I know. So really, really grateful for you for sticking in there. Thank you, Art and FOSS for joining us and telling us about the possibility of these safe docks could be the future for, our river communities here in Portland. And just want to thank everybody for creating the space and the time for joining us tonight. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Peace be with all of you, and have a great Thanksgiving too. I know things are a little tough and stressful right now, but we can still be together with family and friends around this Thanksgiving. So once again, keep an eye on each other, and we'll see you all next month, and we'll see you at the next CAG meeting in 2022. So everyone have a great Christmas if we don't see you at the December meeting for the collaborative forum. We will see you in the new year. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, leave the meeting open until I get to chat.
Okie dokie.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a good one. Okay. So I guess I'm going to have to send this to Jim. But it's going to take a little bit for it to kind of, I guess, buffer on Zoom. Am I right about that, Scott?
I still don't have the chat.
Doesn't the chat save automatically? I thought it did. No?
It may save up in the, but I always try to put it in a separate document just so that you've got it.
Okay, I see. Very good.
Okie doke, I think that we've got it.
Okay, all right. We can stop recording.
You want me to stop it recording?
Yeah, let's do.